So feel free to just call me Jeff. And it's really an amazing opportunity for me to be here. I moved out to LA about a year ago from Cincinnati, Ohio, which is where I grew up. My wife and I live out here. She's the assistant director at Hillel 818 up in the Valley. And so we just do a bunch of Jewish stuff all the time. And I got connected as the 7th grade religious school coordinator last year for Wilshire Boulevard. And I was fortunate that they liked me and let me keep doing it and expand my role. And that is how I got here to you, which I'm really thrilled about. So before—
Can you tell us what your role will be at the temple?
Of course, yes, I can try. I kind of describe it as a generalist. So like today, I was in the early childhood Shabbatot with Rabbi Joel and with Maura Megan for the Browerman Elementary School. And this afternoon, I'll do Shabbat as well. Right now, I'm leading this Torah study. This evening, I'm going to give a brief drash at our Shabbat services. So I'm kind of just getting to experience a lot of different things. And I sit in on a lot of meetings and listen and learn and sort of figure out what it's like to be a rabbi at a really big synagogue with a lot of really incredible things going on. So it's pretty different than the shul I grew up in, which was also historic and old, and from the 1800s, and really this incredible place. But it's in Cincinnati, Ohio, which is pretty different than here. So
you grew up at Plum Street?
I grew up at Rockdale Temple, actually.
Oh, Rockdale, okay.
Yes, which does predate Plum. No, Plum Street's incredible. My wife grew up going to Wise and Plum Street, so we got married at Wise, but not at Plum Street in Cincinnati. So in any case, we're here now, and we love LA, and I have family that lives here in Larchmont. So, we're not so alone, and really just enjoying getting to know this community as well. So, yeah. My role—
two granddaughters graduated from Cincinnati.
So your granddaughter?
Two of them graduated from Cincinnati.
Mazel tov.
Yeah. Well, that's been a while already, like a couple of years ago.
I'm still happy to be here. Cincinnati is a good place to be.
Beautiful, beautiful city.
Yes. But now we're in LA and we're in the fall and we're in Sukkot. And so we gotta talk about that. So I'm curious, before we get started, just to sort of open it up, I don't need everyone to go around and introduce yourselves necessarily, because that could take a while. But I am curious if anybody, and I think I'll get to know you as we go and learn together today. But I am curious if anyone has any main takeaways that they got out of the High Holy Days, something that was notable that you want to bring forward to this group that we can all sort of learn from and reflect on together.
Just one comment that I love that I had never thought of. I think it was Rabbi Joel said, the dome in the sanctuary is like a giant kippah over all of us. And I'd never thought about that. And I just love that symbolism.
Yes,
thank you. I appreciate that. I saw Rebecca's hand and then Merle.
I did 5 Viduis. I went through all of the services, and 5 Viduis was really, really intense. And then I started to think about it, and I looked it up, and it's a it's an acrostic, right? It's alphabetical. But the last one says, "I have strayed and I have led others astray." And I just keep thinking about that as being the last comment of it all.
It's to keep everybody humble. Room to grow.
I think for me, I had never seen the deep bend before. Watching Joel do that, I just never had seen it. I sort of sat there and went, wow, it was kind of breathtaking to me.
Yeah, it's incredible, really, to see that sort of full prostration. We only do it at these few moments. Yeah. Merle, you were going to share something.
Yeah, I was just thinking about what Cindy said about the dome. Rabbi saying the dome is like a giant kippah. When the sanctuary was under reconstruction, refurbishing, I was in the building. It was the day that the camp buses left, and I was with one of the rabbis. I climbed the scaffolding up to the dome that I had stared at my whole life, and touched it. And wow. I still, when he said that and I heard it, my mother wasn't well, and I went back to where my mother lived and told her what I had just done. And she had this big, as if she really knew what was going on, she had this big, amazing smile on her face, like this all worked. And whenever I see the dome somewhere, in a picture or in something in the building, it just brings back that memory to me.
Thank you for sharing. That's a beautiful experience. And
Thanks.
yeah, thank you. So we've gleaned things from our High Holy Day experience, and in many ways, our High Holy Days really aren't over yet. There's this tradition that we're actually not fully sealed until the end of Sukkot, which begins tonight. And so for our Torah study this week, rather than spend time looking at the Parsha, which is important and connected to Sukkot, but is really heavy in sacrifices, I wanted us to explore another tradition of text that occurs on Sukkot. And on Sukkot, it is traditional for us to read Kohelet, Ecclesiastes. Can everyone see my screen? So I have a text sheet, and I'm going to also drop into the chat a PDF that you can open on your own computer. Today, we want to understand why Kohelet, why Ecclesiastes on Sukkot. What's the connection? So we're going to go over what we know about Sukkot a little bit, and then think about what we know about Ecclesiastes and try and figure out how it meshes. Is there a volunteer perhaps who wants to read out our first text from Leviticus, which is going to frame our whole situation, why we're doing this holiday in the first place? Sure, Rebecca.
On the first day, you shall take the product of the hadar trees, branches of palms, boughs of leafy trees, and willows of the brook. And you shall rejoice before Adonai God 7 days. You shall observe it as a festival of Adonai for 7 days in the year. You shall observe it in the 7th month as a law for all time throughout the ages. You shall live in booths 7 days. All citizens in Israel shall live in booths, in order that future generations may know that I made the Israelite people live in booths when I brought them out of the land of Egypt. I, Adonai, your God. So Moses declared to the Israelites the set times of Adonai.
Thank you. Right. Ellen, I see your hand is raised.
Yes. Deuteronomy 16:13-14. 13. Oh, wait, we're on Leviticus?
No, we're on Deuteronomy. Sorry, I scrolled. I forgot that I was sharing my screen for just a moment.
Excuse my
stop me.
Okay. 13. After the ingathering from your threshing floor and your vat, you shall hold the feast of booths for 7 days. You shall rejoice in your festival with your son and daughter, your male and female slave, the Levite, the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow in your communities. Why emphasize rejoicing on this holiday? Why would one rejoice at this time of year?
So these are our questions. Thank you for reading. Before we go into that, I just want to summarize what we have here. Leviticus and Deuteronomy, of course, are semi-consecutive books. They're sequential, right, in their Torah. And this is how we initially developed this tradition, right, of dwelling and building Sukkot. And of course, in both of these passages, there's this emphasis on rejoicing, which then leads us to the question, why emphasize rejoicing on holiday and why this time of year? And that question is one I pose to you. Cindy.
Well, I think the rejoicing comes with gratitude for the harvest and all the bounty and all the fruits and vegetables and everything that you are gathering at this time.
Yeah. I think we'll find in a moment that is very much what people understand. Any other thoughts about seasons? Yeah, Rebecca.
Is there a difference between a holiday and a festival? And would this be considered a festival and therefore more rejoicing?
It's a great question. And so there is a difference. So there are 3 festivals that are pilgrimage festivals. We have Sukkot, we have Pesach, and we have Shavuot. And these festivals are ones where we would go. They're the Shlosha Regalim. Regalim is like our legs because we go there. We have to, I guess they had to walk back in the day. And so there definitely is extra rejoicing, and these festivals require us to bring additional things to the temple. We also get to have additional blessings from the priests at this time as well. So let's see, and you're welcome. I welcome all the thoughts on this question, but we can look to our commentators to see a little bit about what they might have thought. So Chizkuni is this medieval European commentator, and he really tried to understand like deeper meanings of things. And so he said, anyone is welcome to unmute and read if you'd like. I also can just read out the quicker passages. He says, V'samachta b'chagecha, that's the word from the verse in Deuteronomy. You shall rejoice in your festival. Rejoicing has been mentioned already in connection with the Festival of Weeks. The reason why it is mentioned there is that it is the period of harvesting, a major part of the grain harvest. At the time of Sukkot, such joy is increased greatly as everything that the fields and orchards produce is now being gathered in. Okay, so Cindy, your thought about the harvest and what we've picked up, dead on as far as Chizkuni is concerned. Now we have Torah Temima, another commentator, and he was really thought about halakha, about law, and how Torah was informing our actions. And he said, it is a required act in celebration of Sukkot that you must be joyful, but one teaches that in the initial stage of ritual impurity, one who is on that night of the 16th of Tishrei is exempt from rejoicing. So this is just a very practical little piece, right? The rejoicing is still required, but they've given a situation in which we might not do that, depending on where we are in our purity. So my question about this is, what do each of these commentators tell us about rejoicing on Sukkot? Both maybe in the Pshat, like literally, what are they telling us? But also, what is the deeper meaning here? What do we think comes out of this? And why might they have explained it in their way? Merle.
Is it about what's going on in your life at that time?
Well, I'm asking you. I mean, it might be.
I know that
Yeah.
that's what I'm thinking. It's about what's going on in your own life at that moment where you may be exempt because of something that's happening within your world.
Right. I think, yes. I mean, there's some understanding, right? If Torah Temima is trying to establish our practice, what we do there, he has to consider that perhaps we cannot actually always be rejoicing on this holiday. Maybe something has come up, so we're going to figure out a way to continue to do this, but still follow the mitzvah of the holiday. Yeah. Any other thoughts? Penina. Yeah. Oh, you just muted yourself. You were unmuted.
Okay. I think it's the emphasis is on the seasons. So Sukkot, it comes, yes, before the winter, before the water, the rain, but it also gives you the history of everything. While on Shavuot, you concentrate on the wheat and the barley. On Sukkot, you bring in the fruit, but whatever it is that you're bringing also contains the history of the whole settlement. So you have the palm that you have when you shake the lulav. The palm shows you the travel in the desert and their stay in the oasis. And then comes when they walked in, they weren't able to settle anywhere that they wanted to. So they settled in the mountains, and the myrtle grows on the mountains. Mm. Then slowly, they walked their way down to the Arava, to where water is. And the willow is the arava. That's another kind that they hold. And the fruit of the labor supposed to be the etrog, which actually grows on the left bank. Those days, grew on the left bank of the Jordan River. So we have those 4 species that are typical to tell you, and it tells you the history of this resettling in the place. The reason that I say resettling is because the tribes that never left were still there, but they weren't actually farmers; they were shepherds. So the generation that came through the desert actually started this whole farming. כי תבואו אל הארץ ונטעתם כל עץ תחילה. The first thing you do when you come, you plant trees. And that's the connection with the land. That's the holiday that actually shows the connection with the land, turning them into farmers.
So the rejoicing is coming out of both the harvest, but also the ability to have developed into this harvest and carrying that.
Right.
I appreciate that so much.
Right.
I think that's absolutely. Especially Chizkuni is understanding this and bringing forward that.
And the reason that they sit in the Sukkot today, I actually always thought it's only because of the beauty of it or whatever. But actually they spend their nights in the fields because there were tribes that were actually come down the fields to steal the wheat. Mm-hmm. So they actually had to sit guarding there. And there is a saying in the Bible that tells you about the situation. It says, Ki mitzafon tavo hara'a. The bad news will come from the north, which weren't settled by the Israelites. So the Sukkot was not just to sit there. It's actually guarding the fields. So that's something that when you read the stories, people are not very aware of that.
Yes. Okay, so we have this history now of Sukkot. I think we understand. We're oriented to the holiday. We're oriented to rejoicing. Now we can move forward to the tradition. And so we're going to where it's Sukkot, we're in the Sukkah, and what are we doing as a community other than like eating a lot of food and shaking our lulav and saying our blessings? We're also reading Kohelet. So let's go forward. We're going to start by examining 3 translations of the second verse of the entire book. So Kohelet, first of all, does anyone have just a brief explanation? What is Kohelet? Where do you find this? How would you encounter this book? So Kohelet is in our Ketuvim, it's in our Tanakh. It's one of the books of the writings. We have our Torah, we have our prophets, we have our writings. And Kohelet is traditionally attributed to King Solomon. We understand, or we say in tradition, that he wrote this book, and it's understood to be sort of wisdom literature for us. And there's this deep question that we consider is, why this wisdom literature? Why is this what we need to be reading during Sukkot? And what is the connection between the words of Kohelet and the idea of joy and rejoicing and this Zman Simchatenu, this like season of our joy? So Kohelet opens up after they explain that this is the song of Kohelet. It says, Havel Havelim Amar Kohelet Havel Havelim Hakol Havel, right? And so the question is, what does that mean? So now I'm going to present to you 3 varying translations, and I'll ask for a volunteer to read each one. I have any takers to translate Kohelet for us? Rebecca, go for it.
Utter futility, said the Koheleth. Utter futility. All is futile.
All right. Merle, will you read our second one? I saw you had your hand up.
My unmute. Vanity of vanities, says Kohelet. Vanity of vanities. All is vanity.
All right. And our last one, which I'll just give away the farm, is my favorite one. Only vanishing mist, vapor, says Kohelet. Evanescence and mere appearance. Everything is a vanishing mist. So before we dive into the rest of Kohelet and to all the deeper meanings, I do want to know personally to you which translation resonates and why. Each one, I can tell you, I did a whole class on this last year with Dr. Tamara Eskenazi, who is a scholar of our time. She lives in LA, and she has explained and helped us go through the lexicon that really each of these translations has validity. None of them are totally, out of nowhere.
She's in our Saturday morning Torah study.
Nice. She rocks. I love her. So you can bring this to her and say, utter futility, maybe. So I'm curious. So for those of you who, and maybe you're familiar with this idea, but which translation do you think, or not even do you think, but which one gets to you? Which one do you feel?
If I may speak, this is David Trainer.
Please.
The third one speaks because the first two name the condition, futility and vanities. And in a sense it risks being simplification. Whereas the third one is imagery, visual, arguably metaphor, and therefore richer and more suggestive.
Thank you. Scrolling through my people, multiple things. Penina.
Okay.
Penina, what was your, which one?
I think I'm looking at all of them, and I think it's being put there on purpose, right after all this fruit of the land and all this. They show you it's a comparison. Like, look at this. And look, and all compared to all this, everything is Hevel Avalim. It's nothing. I think it was chosen not by mistake. It shows up right after the thing with Sukkot. And it's like, Sukkot is not the fruit of the earth and wheat and all this stuff. That's not Hevel Avalim. It's sustainable. This is just to show you that compared to this is, the rest of it, it's all Hevel Avalim.
Yeah. I'm curious, Rebecca, go ahead.
I guess I would choose the one that I read, futility, because often in my own life, I keep saying, why am I doing this? Why do I keep doing this? Why do I keep trying to push the rock up the hill only to have it fall back down on me? But if I keep putting one foot in front of the other, sometimes it ends up in goodness. Sometimes I feel happy or joyful.
Thank you. So let's dive into the text, because I think that we'll really get more out of this this question, especially of like, what does this have to do, and how might it impact the way we read the text when we start getting into it. So try and pick one of these translations, hold it in your head, use it as the framing for the text as we read it. And then I will ask for a volunteer to read the continuation of this chapter of Ecclesiastes. Any takers? Merle, please. Thank you.
Do you want me to read the whole thing? Or
If you don't mind. Yeah.
Oh, one generation goes, another comes, but the earth remains the same forever. The sun rises and the sun sets and glides back to where it rises. Southward blowing, turning northward, ever turning blows the wind. On its rounds the wind returns. All streams flow into the sea, yet the sea is never full. To the place from which they flow, the streams flow back again. All such things are wearisome, no man can ever state them. The eye never has enough of seeing, nor the ear enough of hearing. Only that shall happen which has happened, only that occur which has occurred. There is nothing new beneath the sun.
Thank you. So this is maybe the second most famous passage in Ecclesiastes, especially that last verse, right? Only that shall happen which has happened, only that occur which has occurred. There is nothing new beneath the sun. So taking it sahakol, the whole section 4 through 9. What is this about?
Think that we have to accept things the way they are and that they don't change. They keep repeating themselves.
Yeah. Maybe
But
people go ahead. Yeah.
But you could add a value to that, which is to say that the world renews itself, and that ties it into what you've been talking about Sukkot and rejoicing, and the fact that, which intrigues me about this, which is that the high holidays are the end of something and the beginning of something. So that there's this notion of circularity and renewal and starting again and celebrating that all seems tied together.
Yeah. Thank you. Any other Cindy? Yeah.
That for the history of the earth, every, let's just say 100 years, they're all new people, all new animals. And the living souls, except for probably trees, keeps changing, although the basic earth remains there and just the people on top of the earth change. Except I think there have been some movement as the land, over the history, but the earth is there, the inhabitants change.
Makes me think of this, the idea that history maybe doesn't literally repeat itself, but it does rhyme. I don't know if people have heard that expression before, but the idea that, right, things will not perhaps happen exactly as they happened, but we do see this repetition and the cyclical nature of events and the way that humans relate to each other. So I'm curious, and we've been addressing it, but this idea, though, that nothing new has occurred beneath the sun, right? That might be challenging. We're sitting here on Zoom. This feels pretty new to me, right? So I'm curious.
Yet he ends up with a 9 that says only that shall happen which has happened. See, he acknowledges that it's not a nothing. Something did happen, and it's happening all the time. I think this is why he ends with it. So sometimes a person can look at the world and says, "Oh, what's the use?" But then he tells you in the end, things happen, and because they happen, things bloom, or things grew, or things were washed away, or whatever. So it's not nothing. It did happen, and it made a difference.
Thank you. I'll share with you from this. I don't know if people are familiar with this particular copy of Ecclesiastes. It's Kohelet, it's JPS. And the commentary here from Fox says about this verse, about there's nothing new under the sun, that Kohelet's real concern is not natural phenomena, but rather human efforts. These fail to achieve anything new and can thus attain no true profit. He is not claiming that specific historical events recur, rather that all types of events, wars, natural disasters, recur, and therefore nothing that happens can be fundamentally new. We are like the figures in a computer game whose actions seem to vary with each play, but are really just ephemeral variants of possibilities dictated by the software. In life, achievements are an illusion, mere echoes of archetypal events. So, given that commentary, I ask the question. We can either go by show of hands or feel free to chime in, but does this passage evoke joy? Or could it?
May I?
And
Oh, God, go ahead, Rebecca.
Rebecca and then David.
I don't know. I like stability in my life. And so if things are stable in my life, as it seems like this is what it's saying, that things are always sort of the same, that for me is good. It's joyful if things are stable.
Nice. Thank you. David.
Now, I have with that interpretation that you just read, it's tough to make this joyful. It feels like a rather dispiriting reading of it. And therefore, what I would pass it back to you and say, could you discuss the relationship of that reading to the notion of joyousness and celebration that you started this discussion with. There seems to be a disconnect, but that in and of itself is interesting. So I pass it back to you.
Sure. Well, that's the question that we're working with, and we have another set of text from Ecclesiastes that will also continue to help us think about that question. But before we go forward into that passage, I'll present this other idea, right, of joy as healing, which is something that we have very contemporarily. Like, we know that this is something in modern thought, but also is an idea that was written about by the great Rebbe Nachman of Breslov, who was one of the early Hasidim. He was a great grandchild of the Baal Shem Tov, and he said, "Mitzvah gedola liot b'simcha tamid." It's a great mitzvah, one of the great commandments, really, to be happy always. But he had nuance, right? He understood. If you read on from there, there's this whole idea that the reason you must be happy is A, it's healing, and B, because there will be sorrow. There will be suffering. It's inevitable. So when you're not in a time of sorrow and you're not in a time of suffering, you really owe it to yourself to be happy and to do your very best to do that so that you can recharge from those hard times. So for me, I think that teaching really does connect here, because if things are cyclical and pain is inevitable, then that means we'll cycle through it back into joy, and we can use the joy to bring us through. That's one of the places that I'm holding on to, at least this year in this Sukkot, and something I'm going to talk about a little bit tonight as well. But let's go forward into chapter 3, which is, I think, the most famous section of Ecclesiastes. But I want you to keep the framing, right, that you have from that second verse. So we'll go back really quickly. Apologies for the scrolling to these 3 translations, right, which might color the whole text for us. Is it futility? Is it vanity? Or is it this vanishing vapor? And we'll use that in mind. We'll keep that in mind as we read 3:1 through 17. So this is a longer passage, and I'm curious if I have someone who would be willing to read verse 1 through 8.
I'd be happy to do it if you would.
Thank you.
A season is set for everything, a time for every experience under heaven, a time for giving birth and a time for dying, a time for planting and a time for uprooting the planted, a time for slaying and a time for healing, a time for tearing down and a time for building up, a time for weeping and a time for laughing, a time for wailing and a time for dancing, a time for throwing stones and a time for gathering stones, a time for embracing and a time for shunning embraces, a time for seeking and a time for losing, a time for keeping and a time for discarding, a time for ripping and a time for sewing, a time for silence and a time for speaking, a time for loving and a time for hating, a time for war and a time for peace.
What value then can the man of affairs get from what he earns? Thank you. So this is our first section of this, but let's continue. Let's read the rest so that we can make sure we have it. And we might, in between, sing a chorus of turn, turn, turn.
That is a season.
Okay, starting at verse 10. Who is willing to read? Say, when I was a student in Israel, they called it the korban. It's the sacrifice.
I don't think so.
Yeah, Penina, go ahead. Thank you.
I think it's what you do with all this. He's looking at all this and he says, look, it's all there. Now, what are we going to do with what are we going to do with it? If you don't do anything with it, then it's hevel avalim. But if you're going to use it and appreciate what it does or what it can give you, even as a feeling, I'm not talking necessarily something tangible. I'm just even to look and to say how beautiful and enjoy it. It enriches your life to be exposed to beauty, I think. It makes you feel better. Yes. So it's what you do with all this. If you don't do anything, then it's hevel avalim. It's nothing. But if you're going to take it and enjoy it and learn how to appreciate it and use it to do something like planting a garden. Make sure that you take all this water that he's talking about and plant a beautiful garden or something.
Thank you.
Or do a desalination so people can drink it like they do today.
Tanina, will you read our next verses starting with 10 for us?
Yeah, I have observed the business that God gave men to the concerned with. He brings everything to pass precisely as at its time. He also puts eternity in their mind. But without men ever guessing from first to last, all the things that God brings to pass, Thus I realized that the only worthwhile thing there is for them is to enjoy themselves and do what is good in their lifetime. Also that whenever a man does eat and drink and get enjoyment out of all his wealth, it is a gift of God. I realize too that whatever God has brought to pass will recur evermore. Nothing can be added to it and nothing taken from it, and God has brought to pass that men revere him. What is occurring occurred long since, and what is to occur occurred long since, and God seeks the pursued. And indeed, I have observed under the sun, alongside justice, there is wickedness. Alongside righteousness, there is wickedness. Is that mused or must?
Mm-hmm.
Mused. I mused, God will doom both righteous and wicked, for he has set a time for every experience and for every happening.
Thank you.
Sof pasuk.
Sof pasuk. Exactly. So we have our portion. So I'm curious what this section is about, this whole thing, just in your own words from anyone. Perhaps, I know there are some faces and names that we haven't heard from yet, and I want to open it up to see if there's anyone who wants to get in here. But if not, I did see Merle's hand, and I'd be happy to hear from you again.
Oh, this was a long time ago. My confirmation class studied Ecclesiastes and all of this. And this particular set of comments was part of my confirmation speech. Don't ask me how long ago it was, because I don't remember what year it was. But I look at it at the beginning where it says there's a time for everything. And that what all of these sentences say to me is that not only is there a time for everything, but you have to accept it and move in whatever direction you have to move to make it work properly for you and the world around you. It's not just about you, it's about your whole community or the world, wherever you are in life.
Nice. I think I agree with you. Yeah. Any other impressions what this section is about? Yeah, Cindy.
To me, this is written by Solomon.
Allegedly.
Oh, okay. That this implies that everything is preordained and that God does micromanage.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah. I also want to say, by the way, this is it, before we go forward, that we should note that this is a traditional translation, but were I to have remembered and taken a little more time, we would have made God not a he necessarily. We would have not made man. We would have made man people, just to clarify that God is probably a genderless divinity. Just fun fact. Rebecca, I saw your hand was up as well. Yeah.
Have I heard that at the time of Genesis, everybody, everywhere, their lives were already decided when Genesis was written? Is that true? And if that's true, then this all makes sense.
I mean, I don't know that I could, arbit whether that's true or not, as I have not finished rabbinical school yet. And also, I think only God knows. But, I think that there's certainly a connected theology there. Right? Like there might be this connection that if we do believe that there is this predetermined destiny for each person written into the universe, then certainly that would fit here. But I'm curious, so maybe that leads us to another question. What if that's not what you believe? What if you believe that free will is everything, and that perhaps you believe in God, and that, you know, we're all created, but that there's no divine plan for you specifically, that you have the ability to do what speaks to you in this world? How then do we consider a passage like this?
You know, I keep wanting to hand it back to you because this is so interesting. How do we? And how does it? I mean, I say, yeah, you're asking the right question. Now give me an answer. Because one can come up with sort of shards of things that tie parts of this together, but there's you're getting at something really interesting here, which is that does this urge us to be pacifist, not in the sense of anti-war, but not active? That's the question. Is it urging us to not worry, take it as it comes, and not try and move the world?
Yeah. Any thoughts about, you know, does this, I think I appreciate your question also, but does this lead us to passivity?
Well, I'd like to comment with what David said, because I do have a friend that always says I'm Sisyphus, that I'm always trying to push that rock up the mountain only to have it come back down on me. And if everything is already written, then I really should stop pushing that rock, and then my friend would be really happy.
So something that I've learned about Kohelet, which is what this question is, what is Kohelet trying to teach us, right? We've talked about what this section is talking about, but what is it trying to teach us, right? And so we've talked about a couple of different thoughts, right? That maybe it teaches us that everything is preordained and we need not worry or maybe even work that hard. But we also have this idea that perhaps it teaches us that we should continue on the path that we are, right? And know that what is meant to happen will happen. But what I've always learned, and this will connect us back, I won't give the final yet, but what I've learned is that Kohelet is about life. And I think somebody said this before. Everything is meant to occur in life. For a person to be a full person and to live, you have to experience love. And you also have to experience loss. And you have to experience sickness. And you have to experience health. And that it's natural. And that it's okay. And that it's actually a mark of God's love in our world and on ourselves, is that we are experiencing things as human beings fully. And so Ecclesiastes is not about hopelessness. And it's not even necessarily about hope. It's just about reality and pushing forward. And I do think that there is perhaps not teaching us to be passive and just assume that everything is created, but I do think there's a comfort that is given to us here in that understanding of the cyclical nature of life. And that if we are in a hard time now, there will be a good time after. And perhaps if we're in a good time now, we know there will be a hard time, but we can remember again that there will be a good time after. And so I'm wondering how the different translations affect the way that we read this passage and also the whole thing, right? We have this idea that everything that occurs in life is meant to occur in life, that we should experience everything fully. So I'm going to go back up to our second verse, and I want to ask, what does the translation that you've been thinking about, how does that connect with this idea of a full life? And then we'll see about Sukkot.
Is there a time that people think when it was written?
Of Kohelet, I think it
Yeah.
is like there are different traditions. If you follow the tradition that is written by Solomon, then it was back in those
Okay,
days. So
and if it's not Solomon,
if it's not, then I
what
think
does it fit? Kind of like the mood.
it seems like it fits later, like it's probably in exile, I think.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah. It's a good
It's
question.
like telling people that they didn't take advantage of what they had. And it's like blaming the victim kind of like thing. I don't like it so much, but hey, it is what it is.
Maybe, yeah. So I'm curious so maybe Penina, which translation then do you think, like given that understanding, which one do you think is the one?
It shows a little bit like, I don't know how to explain it. He is describing beauty. So is it like telling people that they should take advantage of it? Or is it that he wanting to say to people, things will happen regardless? So you have to be like conscious of those things and maybe either enjoy them or avoid whatever it is that needs to be avoided. I'm trying to figure it out. I don't know.
Yeah. So look, there is no right answer per se.
I know. I was thinking that it's kind of like a little depressing.
So I'm glad that you say that.
It takes away your ability to believe in yourself, that you could make a difference. So it bothers me a little bit that way.
I appreciate you saying that, because that's one of the reasons why I wanted to bring this text today, because sometimes I think a lot of the time we read this and it's kind of depressing. And yet we're supposed to read it at this time of joy. Right. And so now, okay, we've experienced a lot of Kohelet already. There's only 12 chapters in Kohelet, and the 12th one was almost certainly written later because it explains what the book was for in a way that we don't really know if it's true. And it tells us about oh, it was written and God does this and that. And we don't really mention God for the rest of this book until the 12th chapter. So we're pretty sure that was like a postscript. Somebody else put that together. So call it 11 authentic chapters of Kohelet. And we've read the really big parts of it. And so I'm curious from you, and I promise I will say what I think and what I know from my studies. But what do you think? Why then Kohelet on Sukkot? Yeah. Merle, go ahead.
It's the start of a new year, and you have to start over as far as how you think and behave and all of it. I'm guessing, but I think that that's where it's coming from.
And yet, if I may follow up on that, it seems to me that Yom Kippur in particular is saying, take a hard look and act differently. It's not just take a hard look and then carry on. There's that leads to something. So this seems to be again in conflict with that, because this seems to be saying it's going to happen regardless of what you do, and yet Yom Kippur is saying take a hard look and change. So again, what I always find so powerful about the Torah is the fact that it doesn't neatly fit together, that it's constantly got these contradictions. But this is a mighty one that you have brought up today.
Yeah.
It makes you
Go ahead, Cindy, and then Penina.
I was just covering a sneeze.
Okay. Penina, go ahead.
I think maybe it's like a dare, like look at all this that's given it to you, and if you're not going to do something with this, then it's all hevel avalim. It's there. Now, what do you do with it?
So when you say that, which translation of Havel Havelim are you thinking of?
I am looking at the first sentence.
The other
Sometimes
futility.
The first one is going to give you the whole thing.
Hmm.
Hevel Avalim, he says it's nothing. Everything is nothing. But then it leaves you to say, okay, so we have to do something with it. It's there for a reason. So.
Rebecca, I think you had a comment also, maybe.
Well, now I'm liking the third one. And what's bringing this to mean something more to me is that a good friend just died. And looking at the chapter 3 of Ecclesiastes, it kind of makes sense that I don't really know how to explain it. I just hope someone reads that chapter when I die. And that the Sukkot itself is a harvest festival. And sometimes you would have maybe a lot of grain and fruit, and some years maybe not. And that's the reason to be joyful. I don't know how it all fits. It's like David said.
Eric, is your hand
Yes,
raised?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. What's the word vanity there that's being repeated?
So that's one of the questions, right? Is they're translating havelim as vanity of vanities.
What are the other meanings of it? What's the word? It's a curious thing. I mean,
so it could mean
it's a striking phrase that everybody.
But it doesn't mean vanity. It means hevel avalim. It means something that doesn't count.
So
Hevel avalim is something that doesn't have no use and doesn't count.
Garbage of garbage.
No, not garbage. Doesn't count. It's there. It's not garbage. The sea is not garbage. But it isn't making, it's not going to make a change to you in your life unless you're going to do something about it. That's the whole thing.
Thank you for that shrewd comment.
So this is the challenge with the translation, right? Because we have this idea, but there are so many. So futility is one way to interpret and translate it.
Right.
Vanity is, I think, the weakest one, and I think
it's the one that everybody remembers. It's what's used.
Right, but I think most scholars would say, like in terms of the linguistics, it's the weaker translation, and then this idea of vanishing mist, right? Havel, another translation of Havel, which we can look all the way back, it's like into ancient literature, has the root of the word for the breath that you give when it's cold outside, and you breathe, and the vapor comes out, and then it vanishes. That is Havel. And that is one reason why it's thought that we read this on Sukkot, right? Because not literally, they didn't say, oh, this is funny, this is a good pun, but this idea that it's getting cooler out. You start to be able to see your breath. We start to be able to experience this Havel Havelim in the moment where we live, where we might not be able to hear, depending. But when I lived in Ohio growing up, right, like really by this time of year, at night, you could see your breath. So that's one of the reasons that we think about this for this time of year, because it's so visceral to us, right? But we also
it's a nice word to have in your language, the word for the visible breath.
Yeah. And then I want to go back to something that has come up, and that I think maybe David brought up, this contrast with Yom Kippur, right? And this is really what's going to, I think, sort of start to bring this together, that, and we're going to come even back to Rabbi Nachman, right? Why must we be joyous all the time? Because it's healing. Yom Kippur is an ordeal, right? We are meant to try and change and be better. And yet we also know that we're being judged. We're hungry, we're striving to be brought back in. And before we can really start the new year and experience all that is meant to be experienced in our lives, we have to heal a little bit. We have to be joyful together as a community. We have to welcome in our guests. We have to support the widow and the orphan. We have to gather in our harvest and appreciate it. That is what gets us really ready to begin our new year. And Kohelet, even though it might depress us and in some ways make us think that everything is useless, it actually might comfort us, because it tells us that even though we just experienced this transformative moment where we're going to try and be better, and we can be, and we can impact things. We also maybe need to just rest and understand that these things have cycles, these things have seasons. And it makes me think also of Rabbi Tarfon in our Pirkei Avot, who tells us that we don't have to complete the work, but we have to continue to be a part of it. We have to be active, right? We have to continue year after year, even though things will happen again and again. We can make it a little bit better. Rabbi Nachman also taught us that in every generation, things are better, and that the inclination to look to the good old days is the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, and that we should only ever look forward and also look at where we are now. And so that, to me, is why Kohelet, why on Sukkot, because it comforts us and it allows us the space for the joy for the year to come that we're really finishing starting as this holiday goes. Any other thoughts, questions, comments, concerns about any of this? David, how was that for you?
I had to unmute myself. That was a really good answer.
Okay.
That's a really good answer, because it's you know, the sequence of events and challenges and experiences that the community has right now doesn't sort itself out into something neat. But what you've shown is that there's a path through that gets you somewhere where you can go on. So it was great. That was a really very satisfactory response.
Okay, I'm glad that worked. Yeah.
I think that it's also stop talking and do something.
Mm-hmm.
Stop talking about all this stuff and do something about it. I mean, enjoy it, appreciate it, do something.
Yeah.
And otherwise, it's all hevel avalim. It's nothing. It's like a call to action instead of just standing there and talking and saying, it's there, look at it, and whatever.
I appreciate that. I think you're right. It's a call to action.
Yeah.
It's a call to move forward and to be joyful, and also spend some time outside, get in your sukkah, and maybe experience that havel havalim. Yeah. Well, thank you all so much for joining today, and participating and learning with me. And
Thank you. It was beautiful.
Thank you. This was wonderful.
And have a good and go
Chag
ahead and, become a rabbi.
I'll do my best. Yeah. Chag Sameach. I hope that I'll have
doing great so far.
to do this with you again. Thank you.
Beautiful, very spiritual. This is lovely.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great class. Thank you.
Thank you to all.
Great start.
Chag Sameach. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat
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 Shalom.
Shalom.
Chag Sameach to everybody. Come on. Okay. Oh, maybe.
Thank you, Hannah. I know we haven't actually met, but I appreciate you're doing the back end.